I'm Roy Romer, former governor of Colorado, former superintendent of Los Angeles school system, and my job is simply to help take your questions and direct them to Governor Bush and Secretary Spelling. And I presume we have mics in the audience. We do. Jeb asked me to identify myself with one paragraph. I and my co-leader, Mark Lamkin, are the head of Ed in 08, Strong American Schools. Our mission is to try to make education a focus in this presidential campaign, a focus of both parties. This is a bipartisan effort. And if you saw that 3-minute video, that's our agenda. That's our agenda. So we are here with friends today, and I just want you to know that there were 460 questions asked in the presidential debates before one was asked on education. And that question was, who's your favorite teacher? Now, look, we have a real bit of work to do here. So I want to pose the first question, and I'm going to turn to you to take the opportunity to really dig with this twosome. The first question is, to both of you, what do you want in the next president in leadership and education? What do you want the next president to focus upon? What role do you want the president to play?
You go first. Age before beauty.
Let me think that through. I'm older than you. Yeah, that works. I want education to be not necessarily a federally dominant issue from a policy point of view, but I want it to be a national priority. And presidents can make that happen. Elections are ugly, you know, normally when you're in them, and particularly if you're in them as a candidate, they get really nasty. But they provide, when they're finished, they provide a chance for renewal. And so the great opportunity, I think, for the next president is to set a national priority. Speaker Rubio brought it up. I think this is a Manhattan Project. We need to figure out a way to stop fighting about whether we think schools are good or bad. I mean, that's the argument as as governor and a candidate. I spent a lot of time having a big food fight with people that didn't like some of our proposals. And the fight was always, you know, someone attacking, someone defending, rather than saying, okay, let's pause for a second and say, whether it's good or bad, it's got to get a heck of a lot better. We should stop fighting about the here and now and think about what it should look like 10 years from now. So I want a president that sets that agenda and then stays with it and doesn't make it something like a photo op, but makes it something substantive over the long haul. Presidents can convene, presidents can lead. They don't have to, it doesn't have to be a federal program per se, although the federal government has an important role to play. And if that happens, I think then a lot of the barriers begin to subside, which is why, Governor, I appreciate what you all are doing, which hopefully, you know, what you didn't mention was that there's a little firepower behind this effort. You have how much money?
Yeah, this thing that we're doing, Ed in 08, is financed by the Broad Foundation and the Gates Foundation, and we have up to $60 million to spend on this effort.
So, you know, that hopefully will be a precursor to this idea of setting a national agenda for change. Beautiful.
Well, here's my answer. I want a president who will guard against benign neglect or advocates of the status quo, so that this president will be essentially the chairman emeritus of an effort like Ed in 08. That we tell ourselves the truth and look at the truth over and over and over. And what I worry about greatly is there's just too much pressure to go back to this ostrich approach, to water down accountability, to get to the soft side, more resources. And I'm not denying that we need more resources, don't get me wrong, but someone who will continue to help educate the American people about this imperative. And that's what I think we have lost, and why I'm so glad about Ed in 08. If the American people do not understand what's at stake, why I have a stake in a kid in Anacostia or Laredo, Texas, or Miami, then this will not happen for a variety of reasons, political and otherwise. And I think the president has to be the chief truth teller about the stakes and about the status of our system.
Good. Now, let's get to the audience. Right over there is our first questioner.
In one humble man's opinion, I think there are only two issues really in education that mean anything. especially if we're going to change the education systems and the way things are done here in this country. Number one is you have to deal with the union issue, which I don't even want to go into, because they are the status quo, they are the ostrich.
Right.
So until you can take the unions out of education, you're going to have status quo. The flip side of that is choice through charter schools. With charter schools, we're supposed to be the experiment. So I would ask you, when you reauthorize No Child Left Behind, to cut charter schools out of No Child Left Behind and let them stand on their own. We're responsibility to be accountable for the dollars we get and what we produce with our students' education. Let that be the indicator, not a bunch of rules in Washington.
Well, let me take that by saying that, you know, unless we have real, meaningful accountability attaches to tax dollars, people don't believe it. And, you know, can we make accountability systems work better? You bet. Must we? You bet. I would suggest that, you know, when the president showed up in Washington, there were about 10 states that had real annual measurement and real disaggregation of data. So I commend the school community for getting some systems in place for the rest of the country that really has told us so much more, and they can be perfected. But frankly, we're really in the infancy of using data and information to guide and improve our practice. With respect to your question about unions, you know, I'm a practical person, and you know, I don't see that sort of overwhelming change happening in our political system, in our governance system at the state, local, or federal level. But I will say this, I do think there is a real appetite and possibility for new unions, new approaches, places that walk with us to reform schools. That's why the data is so important. Without that transparency, without that appetite, there is no pressure to take on those institutions.
Let's have the next question. Or you want to comment on it, Jeff?
No, I would echo the Secretary's comments about teachers' unions. There are many services and industries in our country where there's been the transformation to the 21st century with union involvement. I mean, again, I've got tire marks on my forehead and bruises on my ribs for fighting this fight. Tal Fair, who's now the chairman of the Board of Education in Florida, and I formed one of the first 4 charter schools in Florida a long time ago. And you know, the unions were opposed to it. But the unions mortgaged apparently their building when I ran for re-election. I mean, I've been to this battle, and so no one's going to suggest that I'm, you know, I fought the fight. But I think we need to get beyond the food fight now and figure out, you know, Nixon to China approaches to this. You know, find ways to find common ground without watering down the principles to get to where we need to be. And because at the end of the day, we'll have, you know, I believe we need many more choice programs, and we need to expand choice programs beyond the narrow focus that exists. But at the end of the day, 90% of our kids are going to be educated in public schools, and they have to be better, and our teachers need to be better equipped, and we have to find common ground there, because I don't think the unions are going to go away, and nor do they necessarily have to.
Right, I agree.
All right, over here. And please state your name first.
Great. Madam Secretary, Governor Mike Petrilli from the Thomas B. Fordham Institute. I just got a call from an Education Week reporter that said about an hour ago the House Appropriations Committee voted to zero out the Reading First program. I was wondering if Secretary Spellings wanted to make a comment about that.
Well, of course, I think I've received the same word, and I think it's really, really tragic. Reading First is a $1 billion reading program that is for the single program in the federal government that is based on a ton of research that was developed not within the education community, but within the health science community, the brain research that has done so much to help us crack the code on how we teach kids to read. And it's working. And if I had a nickel for every superintendent, classroom teacher, and school chief that said, you know, without Reading First, we wouldn't see these scores improve like they are, I mean, I think it's tragic. And I think that local people that feel that way, you know, need to respond to their, you know, elected representatives.
From the other side of the aisle, just let me say, when I was in LA for 6.5 years, it was the foundation of what we began in elementary change, and it was tremendously productive.
I would, in Florida, we use that money to leverage, to get state monies, thanks to the Florida legislature. And we had reading coaches in every elementary school, not just Title I schools. We had reading coaches in middle schools teaching teachers how to teach reading. We never even had a reading course in middle school that I'm aware of 10 years ago. And now this is in jeopardy, and if you look at the outcomes on reading assessment in Florida, these gains are historic. I mean, we're talking about 75% more kids reading at grade level than before, and the reading coaches and the monies that came were a key element of that. So I'm not surprised. I'm not ever surprised at Congress and Washington in general, but it would be really heartbreaking if that happened out in the real world.
Right over here. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm Nancy Spence, State Senator from Colorado. Governor Romer, I enjoy very much serving with your son, Senator Chris Romer, in the Colorado legislature. Madam
No, we're not talking about dynasties here. I'm opposed to dynasties.
Yeah, right.
Madam Secretary and Governor Bush, my question to you is, no matter which president is successful in the November elections, what do you feel is the future of No Child Left Behind based on one or the other?
Well, I'll start. I think it depends on us. I think if people like us turn up the heat hot enough where we have strong support for, change the name to motherhood and apple pie. I don't care. But we have to have strong support for annual measurement, disaggregation of data, and real consequences like choice. And so, that remains to be seen. How vigorous can our mighty force get to make sure that those core principles stay true? Now, I will say this. I think that these notions are, after 6 years or so, are beginning to sink down in the states in ways that smart governors and smart policymakers are seeing these principles work for them. And so I like to think that combination we'll hear a lot of chatter about the politics, we'll hear a lot of talk about the name, and there'll be great fanfare about changing the name. But what I'm going to look at is the policy still sound?
I have no idea. And frankly, we would have done the same things that we did when over the last 10 years in Florida without it. It just provided a backup support that was critical. So now the reforms are in place, and I think the next generation of leaders in Florida see the benefits of it, and irrespective of what happens in No Child Left Behind, will continue on. But there are a lot of states that need that backup support now, and so the reauthorization will probably be more meaningful in other parts of the country, and I hope it passes. I hope it's reauthorized. I'll say one thing just from a political point of view, Governor, because you've spent a lot of your time in public life trying to find common ground across the divide that seems even greater today. This piece of legislation, who were the sponsors, Secretary?
Ted Kennedy, George Miller, John Boehner, and Judd Gregg.
That's about as wide a gap ideologically as you could find, and we need more of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
If my Lord would grant me a wish politically, if Senator Obama becomes president, this would be a great place for him to defy a core constituency, and to change the whole debate. I mean, because the Nixon to China approach to policy making is so critical now because we seem to be so entrenched. This is a place where he could do that, where he could immediately tear down a lot of the barriers to bring people together, to bring these unique constituencies together, to build a much better education system. And if President McCain is president, Senator McCain becomes president, he has that same ability. He has that skill set of reaching across the aisle and finding that common ground. And so I hope and pray that happens. Roy, I mean, your experience is the same. You've had to find ways to do that, don't you?
I absolutely, let me comment on what I believe will happen. I think they will change the name, but they will keep the act. They will need to make some changes, some improvements, but it needs to stay for the reasons that Margaret stated. I just tell you, you can't do this unless you measure what you've done. Let me give you a simple analogy. I'm a farmer before I became everything else in my life. And we lived 13 miles from town, and every time we went to town, we always looked at everybody else's crops to see whether they were taller than yours. And it was accountability. And if they had a lot better crop, you want to know what they did. And you'd go talk to them and say, I need to change my behavior because I need to do what you're doing. Well, on education, it's crazy for me to have a child or grandchild and go to a doctor and I pay all that attention to an x-ray of their health, but then ignore real effective measurement in education. If you can't measure it, I don't think you know whether you're getting it done.
I have one thing I want to add. And amen, amen. And that's why we have to, when we hear people say too much testing, teaching to the test, narrowing the curriculum, blah, 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 we need to get back on them and say, wait a minute. Because we tried the other, let's not ever find out anything before. And that's the other thing. What's the alternative? Let's not find out? Let's not ask anymore? We need to perfect assessment, improve accountability, but we must have it.
Governor Romer, your analogy about the farm is fantastic, except that some farmers would drive by the guy's crops and say, I can't compete, I want a subsidy, and give me money for not growing my crop.
Is that how you do it in Florida?
No, that's how we do it in Washington.
There's a question right down at this table.
Darn it, we're just getting going.
Well, I'm getting instructions to wrap up. Can we take two more?
Yeah.
Quick.
Yes.
What?
She said yes.
Let's just take two quick
You have
ones.
to leave.
At some
Two quick
point
ones?
soon, yeah, but anyway, we've got some press that we're doing. So.
Where are you? Maybe we don't have any more. Right here. Oh, back here? Okay, go ahead.
Just stand up and...
Just blurt it out.
We'll be quick.
Madam Secretary and Governor, my question is in reference to your mentioning of technology. Both of you mentioned the wonderful capabilities of technology for customization. And I wonder, with programs like, for example, MIT's OpenCourseWare, what can be done to create a robust marketplace for educational materials?
Well, I think there are some smart policy things we can do and should do in Washington. I'm going to say more about this before I leave office, but we've spent about $20 billion on the E-rate, about $4 billion from the Department of Education for this task with little to show for it. And I think we need to remove some of the barriers for the way those funds are spent on, phone bills and infrastructure alone. I know the telephone crowd won't like this necessarily, and allow those monies to be used for teacher training, content, better assessment, those sorts of things. I also think we can figure out better, smarter ways to leverage those resources around a plan. We really have no technology plan per se in this country. It's the 1,000 flowers blooming and some weeds approach, and we can be smarter than that. The first best time to get a plan is 10 years ago. The second best day is tomorrow or today.
I would only add that if you have a robust accountability system where there's consequences between mediocrity and success, then technology is used as part of the strategy to achieve success. Without accountability, without consequences, it's just a vendor-driven deal.
Okay, final question. Where is our mic?
The Straight Talk Express.
Okay, right here.
Hi, my name's Annette Campbell. I'm a Senior Coordinator of Teacher Professional Development with Polk County Schools, and I have two questions. I was wondering, how are we going to maintain the same level of accountability for private schools as we do for public schools, since I know in this state we don't require private schools to do the FCAT testing. And I was also wondering, with the grim statistics with teacher retention, if there's any discussion with any federal funding or any uniformity of recruitment and payment for National Board Certified Teachers nationwide.
Let me take the last part first. We have about a $3 billion pot of resources in Title II that's pointed at things related to teachers. Mostly that's spent for teacher aides and reducing class size, but certainly those monies can be spent on the sorts of things you talk about. National Board Certification is something that states or local districts have bought into or not, and so is supported there. It's certainly an allowable purpose, but not necessarily one that is necessarily endorsed by the federal government. On the first part about private schools, I think the notion of tax dollars and accountability go together. So if we're not funding private schools, there will not be requirements or mandates from Washington for assessment or other regulations.
You may remember that we had an opportunity scholarship program here before Margaret stole the name, or somebody in D.C. did, for the voucher program in D.C., and it was overturned by the Supreme Court, and that money did require, for the kids that, in the failing schools that went to private schools, did require the FCAT. But there are other means of having accountability for public dollars going to private schools. It doesn't have to be the Florida Comprehensive Achievement Test or the other state tests. And ultimately, you know, parent engagement is the best means of accountability. If we got parents more involved, whether it's public or private schools, the need for accountability and transparency would probably lessen because they would be much more informed.
Okay. Thank you. Now, we're ready for the rest of the day. Is there someone who wants to direct us where we go from here? Yeah. Do you have a mic you want to say it where people can hear it?
Nutcracker 1 and 2.
Okay, got it.